Mom, I need to ask you something, and I don't want you to freak out. Just listen, okay? That shocking confession from my son is what permanently split my life into two halves, the before and the after. Welcome back, everyone, to an incredibly complex and emotional story. Before we dive into what happened next, please make sure you've hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing. The house had been so quiet since Thomas passed, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that settles into the walls, into the spaces between the ticking of clocks and the creaks of the floorboards. I'd always thought silence would be peaceful, maybe even comforting. But this kind of quiet wasn't soothing. It was hollow and cold, a vast emptiness that swallowed all sound and warmth. It had been just over 6 months since the funeral. Sometimes I still caught myself reaching across the bed in the middle of the night, expecting to feel the warmth of his body, the soft rise and fall of his chest. My hand would meet cold sheets, and I'd lie there with my eyes open, trying to remember the exact way his breath sounded in the dark. Each night was a battle with memory, a desperate attempt to hold on to the fragments of a life that once was. Our son, Josh, had been my rock through it all. He checked in more than he probably needed to, always offering to stop by, to help with groceries, or to fix that leaky faucet Thomas never quite got around to. He was 32 now, a man with broad shoulders and kind eyes, eyes that always looked like they were holding something back, grief maybe, or something deeper. Josh's eyes held a private sorrow I couldn't name, an invisible weight he seemed to carry alone. That Saturday afternoon, I was folding laundry on the couch, the TV low in the background, playing reruns of some show I wasn't really watching. Josh let himself in, like he always did, calling out, "Mom!" "In here, sweetheart," I said, flipping a towel into the basket. He came into the living room with a grocery bag in one hand and that bashful smile that still reminded me of him at 6 years old, trying to hide the mud on his jeans. "I picked up that tea you like," he said, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. "That's sweet of you." I tried to keep my voice steady. Lately, even the smallest acts of kindness had a way of making my chest tighten, as if the world's goodness only highlighted my loss. He walked over and sat beside me, close, but not too close, like he didn't want to crowd me. I looked at him then, really looked, and noticed something different. Maybe it was the way his shoulders sagged a little more, or the way his jaw tensed when he wasn't speaking. He was carrying something. I could feel it. "You okay?" I asked softly. He hesitated. "Yeah. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot." "About Dad, I guessed?" He nodded. "About everything. You, me. What life looks like now." I rested my hand on his. "We're both adjusting. It's not easy, I know." Josh swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I keep remembering that night, after the hospital. You didn't sleep. You just sat in Dad's chair all night." I looked down, smiling faintly. I couldn't bear the bed without him. That chair still smelled like his cologne. We were both quiet for a long moment. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. A car door slammed. The normal sounds of life went on, as if they didn't know our world had shattered. "I miss him every day," he said, almost in a whisper. "Me too," I replied, "more than I ever thought possible." Then he turned to me, and there was something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, yes. But something else too, a question, one that hadn't yet reached his lips but was hovering there, weighty and dangerous. "What is it, Josh?" He ran his hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I don't want you to freak out. Just listen, okay?" I blinked, suddenly very still. "You're scaring me." No, it's nothing bad, not like that." He paused, searching my face. "Have you ever felt like you were still full of something, even when you're supposed to be empty?" I tilted my head. "What do you mean?" He looked down, twisting his hands together like a boy confessing to breaking a window. "It's like, ever since Dad passed, I felt this pull toward you. Not just because you're my mom and you need support, it's more than that, and it scares the hell out of me." I sat frozen. My heart stuttered, unsure whether to race or stop entirely. "Josh?" He looked up quickly, eyes pleading. "I know how this sounds. I've gone over it 100 times in my head. I kept trying to convince myself it was just grief or maybe loneliness, but it's not going away." I reached for the glass of water on the coffee table, my hands trembling slightly. "We've been through so much. Maybe we're just confusing connection with something else." "Maybe," he said. "But what if we're not?" The silence stretched again, this time thicker, heavier. I stood and walked toward the window, trying to gather my thoughts. The garden was blooming. The peonies Thomas had planted in the spring before he got sick were open, wide and pink, like they didn't know the world had changed. I could feel Josh behind me, not moving, waiting for me to speak. I finally said, "This isn't something we can just talk through in an afternoon." "I know. I love you, Josh. I always will. But I need time to understand what you're feeling and what I'm feeling too." He nodded slowly. "Okay, I can wait. I just couldn't keep it inside anymore." I turned to him, studying the boy who had become a man almost without me realizing it. "Neither can I." He came to me then, not to touch, not to hold, just to stand close, like he wanted me to feel that we were still tethered to each other, even if the shape of our relationship was suddenly shifting. We stood like that until the sun began to dip low, the light casting long shadows across the floor, and in the stillness of our quiet home, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel quite so alone. If you're finding this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Every bit of your support is a huge encouragement for us to continue. That night, after Josh left, I sat in Thomas's old chair and wrapped myself in one of his cardigans. The soft wool still held a faint trace of him, and I pulled it tighter, like maybe it could hold me together. My mind wouldn't rest. Josh's words had shaken something in me, something I hadn't dared acknowledge. I dismissed so many of my feelings lately as grief, exhaustion, or the dizzying loneliness that follows the loss of someone you've built your life around. But now it felt more complicated, twisted with something that was both unsettling and strangely comforting. I didn't sleep. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of the night, the occasional groan of old pipes, the far-off hum of a passing car, the wind brushing against the windows. And underneath it all, my heartbeat, steady but uncertain. The next morning, I found myself moving through the kitchen on autopilot. I poured coffee, but it sat untouched. I wandered through the house, touching the backs of chairs, trailing my fingers over picture frames. Everything felt more vivid, like the world had gained some strange clarity. Around noon, my phone buzzed. "Josh, hey Mom, mind if I stop by later?" I stared at the message for a full minute before replying. "Me, of course." When he arrived that afternoon, he looked hesitant, like he wasn't sure how to carry himself. He had always been confident around me, affectionate even, quick to hug, to tease, but now his every move felt measured. "I brought those bulbs you wanted to plant," he said, holding up a little brown bag from the garden center. "Oh, I'd forgotten about those. Figured they'd be good for the yard." We worked in the garden for an hour, barely talking. Our hands worked the earth, cool and damp, and the rhythm of digging, placing, covering was strangely soothing. Every so often, our arms would brush or our eyes would meet just a second too long. But we didn't speak about it, not yet. When we finally came inside, our shoes muddy and our faces flushed from the sun, I offered him a glass of lemonade. He followed me into the kitchen, watching me move like I was something fragile. I leaned against the counter. "About yesterday." He nodded quickly. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it nonstop. I wasn't sure if I should have said anything." "No, I'm glad you did." "I needed to hear it." "You're not angry?" "Angry?" I almost laughed, but it came out soft and strange. "No, I'm confused, Josh. I'm overwhelmed, but I'm not angry." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I keep seeing you as more than just my mom, not in a disrespectful way, just as a woman. A person, someone who's been through pain, who's still beautiful and kind and strong." My breath caught. "Josh?" He didn't move any closer. Just looked at me with those warm, uncertain eyes. "It's like I've woken up and seen you for the first time." I turned away, busying my hands with a towel near the sink, but my heart was pounding again. There was a strange kind of heat in the room now, subtle but undeniable. "I don't know what to do with what you're saying," I whispered. "This isn't something we were ever prepared for." "I know, but maybe it's something we were meant to discover." "Even if it makes no sense, even if it scares us." There was a long silence. "I keep thinking," I said, still not facing him, "about how much of myself I gave to your father. 38 years and now I don't even know who I am without him." Josh came closer, but still kept his distance. "Maybe that's what this is. You figuring out who you are?" "Me too." I turned to face him. The afternoon light from the kitchen window bathed him in a soft, golden glow. He looked so much like Thomas in that moment, it made my chest ache, but he was also so distinctly himself. I reached out, gently brushing a leaf from his shoulder. He didn't flinch. "This isn't something we rush," I said. "We don't owe anyone answers, but we owe each other honesty." "I want that," he said softly, "more than anything." We ended the evening on the porch, wrapped in blankets as the sky turned orange and lilac. Josh told me about his childhood memories, things I'd long forgotten. How I used to sing while folding laundry. How I cried when he scraped his knee at 5. How he'd always known I was the glue holding the family together. And I told him about the loneliness, the silence in the mornings, the way I sometimes reached for Thomas's voice in the dark, only to remember that it would never come again. We didn't touch, we didn't cross any lines, but in that quiet evening light, with the air cooling around us and the scent of jasmine rising from the garden, I felt something start to unfold between us. Something delicate and tentative, but undeniably real. Something neither of us had asked for, and yet, maybe, something we both needed. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Josh came by more often, but we danced around each other in this quiet, careful rhythm. We'd sit in the den and talk about nothing. Old movies, his job, the neighbor's annoying dog, but under every word was something heavier, unsaid but ever present. A current, subtle but undeniable. I'd catch him watching me sometimes, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but like he was trying to memorize something. The slope of my shoulders, the sound of my laugh, the way I stirred my tea. It made me feel seen, and after so many months of drifting through life invisible, it stirred something deep inside me, something I'd buried long before Thomas passed. One rainy evening, I invited Josh to stay for dinner. Nothing fancy, just meatloaf and green beans, the kind of meal I used to make when he still lived at home. He set the table while I finished in the kitchen, and it all felt so strangely normal, like we'd slipped backward into time. We ate slowly, quietly. I noticed the way his eyes lingered on my face when I talked. How he smiled at my stories like he hadn't heard them a dozen times already. When we were done, I reached to take his plate, but he stopped me with a gentle hand on mine. "Can I say something?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, heart ticking faster. "I know we've been careful. I know you've needed space to sort things out, but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel is just some misplaced emotion. It's not about grief." "Not anymore." I held his gaze, but I couldn't speak. The air between us had thickened. "I know how this sounds," he continued. "I know what people would think, but when I'm with you, everything makes sense. I feel calm, whole." I finally exhaled, slowly. "It scares me, Josh, not because of you, but because part of me feels it too, and I don't know what to do with that." He nodded. "I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I just need you to know I'm here. I'll wait as long as it takes." I stood and gathered the plates, partly because I needed to move, to breathe. He followed me to the sink, and together we washed and dried in silence, our shoulders brushing now and then. It was the kind of domestic rhythm I hadn't shared with anyone since Thomas, and it felt natural, too natural. Late that night, after he'd gone, I stood in front of the hallway mirror, just staring at myself. I saw a woman with lines around her eyes, with silver at her temples, but I also saw something else, something softer, more alive, like some part of me was stirring after a long, cold winter. I touched my reflection's cheek as if trying to trace who I used to be, who I was becoming. The next morning, I found a note on the front porch. Josh must have left it on his way to work. "Mom, Laura, I know the lines between us are blurred, but I meant what I said. I see you, not just the mother who raised me, not just the woman who loved Dad, but the person you are right now. I'm not running from that anymore. Yours always, Josh." I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time, my tea going cold beside me. There was a garden bed near the fence that hadn't been touched since last year. It was overgrown, half swallowed by weeds. I found myself out there by noon, pulling roots, clearing soil, laying down fresh compost. My hands worked instinctively, and I felt the ache in my arms, the dirt under my nails, the sun warming the back of my neck. When I looked up, Josh was leaning against the gate, watching me. "I didn't know you were coming today," I said, surprised. "I was in the area," he said, smiling softly. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets, his jeans smudged with paint from work. "You look good out here," he said, "dirty and tired." "Happy," he replied. I hesitated, then said, "I got your note." "I meant every word." "I know." We stood facing each other for a moment. Then, without thinking, I reached out and touched his arm, just a gentle brush of my fingertips. His breath caught, and he didn't move away. "Josh," I whispered, "I don't know what we're doing." "Neither do I," he said, voice trembling slightly. "But I know I'm not afraid anymore." Neither was I. That evening, we sat inside, close together on the couch. The TV was on, but we weren't watching. We talked about everything and nothing, about the day he broke his arm jumping from the porch when he was 10, about how he used to lie next to me during storms because he hated the thunder, about how, in a way, we'd always held each other up. And then, without words, he reached for my hand. I let him. It wasn't romantic. Not exactly. It was something deeper, something born of years and pain and healing. His thumb moved gently across my knuckles, and I closed my eyes, letting the silence wrap around us like a blanket. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Not because someone had come to save me, but because someone had come to see me, and I had let him. The days after that were gentle. That's the word that keeps coming to me, gentle. There was no rush, no plan, just slow mornings and longer conversations, walks in the backyard, dinners where we lingered at the table long after the plates were cleared. Something in me had shifted, and I could feel it in the way I moved, the way I looked at Josh, and the way he looked at me. He wasn't a boy anymore. That truth had settled in fully now. He was a man with his own heartache, his own tenderness, his own quiet strength. And I, after all this time, had finally begun to see myself not just as a widow, not just as his mother, but as a woman again. One afternoon, a cool breeze drifted through the open window while I was reading. Josh had come by after work, still in his dusty work clothes, and lay stretched out on the carpet near my feet, arms folded behind his head like he used to when he was younger. The way he glanced up at me, smiling like there was nowhere else in the world he wanted to be, it did something to me I couldn't explain, and maybe I didn't need to anymore. "Can I ask you something?" I said, setting the book down. "Anything. If your father were here, what do you think he'd say? About us?" "About this?" Josh's face softened. "I've thought about that more than I want to admit." "Me too." "I think," he said slowly, "he'd want you to be happy. He loved you so much, Mom. He always said you were the best part of him, and if he knew I could take care of you, really care for you, he wouldn't stand in the way." I nodded, but the emotion was thick in my throat. I couldn't speak. Josh sat up then, kneeling beside the couch where I sat. He reached for my hand, kissed the back of it softly, then rested it against his chest. "I'm not trying to fill his place. I never could. I don't want to take anything away from what you had with him." "I know," I whispered. "I just want to be whatever you need me to be, whatever feels right for you." And it was in that moment I realized something that surprised me. Not just that my heart had opened to something new, but that maybe, just maybe, what Josh and I were discovering wasn't about replacing anything. It was about honoring what we'd both lost by choosing something whole and healing in return. That evening, we went through old photo albums together. I watched his face light up at pictures of his childhood, of holidays and school plays and beach trips. There was a photo of Thomas holding him as a toddler, both of them grinning ear to ear. I touched the edge of it gently. "Do you think he knew this was coming?" Josh asked, voice quiet. "No," I said, "but he always told me. Love finds us in unexpected ways." The next morning, I woke up feeling calm, no tension in my chest, no fear in my bones. I dressed slowly, brushed my hair, and stood in front of the mirror again. This time, I saw myself, not the woman I used to be or the one I was trying to become. Just me, here and now. When Josh arrived, he brought coffee and fresh croissants, and we sat on the porch as the sun rose higher. The sky was clear, the breeze light. "I've been thinking," I said. He looked at me, attentive, waiting. "I want to stop hiding from this, from us." His eyes filled, and he reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. "I don't know what the future looks like," I added. "I don't know what people will think, but I know how I feel when you're near me, and I haven't felt this alive in years." He nodded, lips parting in a breath he'd been holding. "Me too." I leaned against his shoulder, and we sat like that for a long time, listening to the rustle of the trees, the distant laughter of children playing down the street. Later that day, we planted the last of the bulbs in the garden. The earth was warm and soft, and the sun caught the streaks of silver in my hair, the way it always used to in Thomas's favorite months. Josh pressed his hand over mine as we smoothed the soil, his touch steady. There was no need for labels, no grand declarations. What we shared wasn't about logic. It was about healing, about stepping into the unknown with grace, guided not by rules or roles, but by truth and quiet, unwavering care. As the days passed, something new took root between us, slow, delicate, but real. And as the peonies began to bloom again in the spring, I realized I had found something I never expected. Not just love, but the courage to accept it. In the most unlikely of places, I found myself, and I wasn't alone. This story reminds us that the heart has its own reasons, and sometimes the path to healing our deepest wounds is found where we least expect it. Thank you for listening. Press 1 in the comments if this story touched your heart. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more meaningful stories.